Welcome to this Theseus colloquium. Thank you for coming. I'm Alvise Martozzi. I will chair this colloquium. Unfortunately, Professor Sacchi, who is the coordinator of the Theseus which is the Center for Technology, Society and Humanity, cannot be here now. He will arrive a bit later because has some issues in the rectorate. He apologized for this delay, but he asked to start. Today we have Jonathan Ventura from Shankar Engineering, Design and Art, which is a design school in Israel. Sorry, I lost. He's also the head. He's associated professor there, where he teach design anthropology, and he's also the head of the unit for history and theory of art and design. And today he will talk with us about design anthropology. And as you know, the title is The Rise and Fall of Design Anthropology. Jonathan has done research in design anthropology in Britain and in Israel for many years. He recently wrote a book, not specifically about design anthropology, but an introduction to design theory, where there is also chapters telling about design and anthropology. And he is one of the creators of the social design network. So one of his activities is to work in the field of social design, which will be also a topic of his talk today. Before leaving the stage to Jonathan, who I thank for being here with us, I just want to add a few words about let's say our collaboration, because today's meeting was born out of a visiting. So Jonathan is here for a week, is a visiting scholar of Theseus, and we are working together on these topics. So we are discussing together about design anthropology, the rise and fall, and I'm not a design anthropologist, but I'm interested in the topic because I'm interested in the relation between social sciences and design. So we are trying to figure out its dynamics or rise and fall together and trying to write something together during this week. And so this collaboration is born in turn out of our attending and being part of the social design network. And more specifically, it was born, one of the meetings of the social design network was in Jerusalem, and exactly 2 years ago. And for me, that was the start in the sense that of our collaboration. In that meeting, what characterized that meeting is that was organized by Jonathan, is that we were there talking about social design and talking about projects taking place on both sides, on Jerusalem East and Jerusalem West, and on both sides of the Greenland. So we met Palestinians living in the occupied territories who were developing social design or design-related projects in Palestine. So one of the things that characterize the work of Jonathan is a relation between Israel and occupied territories that has been going on since a long time. And of course, after the attack of Hamas on Israeli citizens, and after the retaliation of the Netanyahu government and Israeli army that somehow involved the entire population of Gaza, of course, this kind of dialogue is drastically jeopardized. And it's something that we have been talking about during these days, how, the situation to develop and to explore possible ways of living in that part, in that land, somehow are cut. It's very difficult right now to discuss all these issues. So it's a very different situation from what I saw 2 years ago. And of course, this possibility of dialogue, this possibility of exploring and designing ways of life different in that part of the land is, it's one of the victims. Of course, not the main one. It's not the most relevant one. There are many other victims, but it's one of them. So this possibility of dialogue with also through design. This will not be the topic of today's conference, but somehow social design is also about that, and design anthropology is also about that. So I leave the floor to Jonathan, and I thank you very much for being here with us. And so we are not too many, and so he will give his talk, but then the discussion is really open. I hope that we will have the chance to really, so maybe, I don't know if you want to get closer, I don't know, but maybe after but it's really open we are few, but I hope that this will allow an intense discussion, like a bit the one we are having, in my office, trying to sorting out what is the dynamic of rise and fall of design. Okay, thank you for coming, and thank you, Jonas.
Yeah. Okay, so first of all, thank you, Alvise, for this introduction, and thank you, Cristiano and Stefano. I hope that you will come, and again, thank you for Teseus for inviting me and Politecnico. I will say a few sentences about what Alvise said before, and hopefully, if you guys want to have a discussion afterwards, you're more than welcome. And I hope that, again, I didn't plan this as like someone throwing an hour of lecture on you guys, but more of a series of questions, because unfortunately I don't have the answers yet. But as Alvise mentioned, we are both working on that. Regarding the elephant in the room, I know it's a very, very big topic, and it's very complex. I told Alvise that it's a bit tricky for me, because like researchers in Hungary, for example, which I also work there, I could get in a bit of trouble with my government, and I kind of find myself a representative of the government, which I'm not, and I don't like at all, to say the least. The situation is very sad, obviously, on both sides. It's especially sad since the only people that were on the good side in Israel, which are academics, find themselves more and more secluded, and the government is very adamant in excluding us further with budgets and all that. So I'm going to be a bit cautious, but again, as I mentioned, the situation is not good, and I have Palestinian students and friends, and it's very complicated. I think most people kind of lost hope, but I hope something will happen. I don't know, either the government will fall and I hope I can say that at least. But again, for me personally, as a journey with anthropology, I started in my MA thesis, I researched Marianic rituals in the East Bank. So I had a lot of friends both in the eastern parts of Jerusalem and in the north, in Nazareth. But from there on, I kind of swiveled towards design. But again, I'll just say that during COVID, I worked for almost 2 years, and I was responsible for Eastern Jerusalem. So I was probably the only one that took care of people, of Palestinian Jerusalemians during COVID. Again, just to let you know of the complexity, Jerusalem is not a huge city. It's roughly 1 million people, but a third of that are Palestinians, a third are secular Jews, and a third is ultra-Orthodox. So I was responsible for these 350,000 people, for the tests and vaccinations and working with communities and social aid and all that. Back then I also worked, and again, not to quote me on that, but with Hamas, because I'm a pragmatist. So obviously no one said it officially because none of the parts were allowed, I guess. But since then, again, things have really changed. So so that's my 2.5 sentences. But again, if you guys want to have any questions that I can answer, then great. Okay, so I'm going to start. And again, if you see anything interesting, just, I don't know, write a note or something and ask me afterwards, because I think there's a lot of things here. It's not a very visual presentation like designers like, but it's kind of an overview of design anthropology, and I did a thorough work because Alvisa is very thorough. And afterwards, if you guys want to, I can send you the presentation. So currently I work in 4 major parts professionally. Obviously I teach, and I also teach at the PhD school at MOME in Budapest. I write more about design theory. I write a bit for the Bloomsbury Design Encyclopedia. I manage the Social Design Network, and I work very, very little at a transportation design studio that's called Public Zone. And the 2 last publications, I published a book with Routledge that's called Introduction to Design Theory, and I apparently it's the first book in this subject, which is always good, because your book can be really bad, but all the people will buy it because it's the only one. And I wrote a bit about some aesthetics, if you guys know it, and design culture. And again, if you guys want any of these materials, I'll send you a link. So I always like to start with Clifford Geertz, because for me he was, I don't know, I have a soft spot for him. First of all, he came to Israel a few times. Unfortunately, I was too young, so I didn't meet him. But I was always taught as a young anthropologist that one of the major differences between sociologists and anthropologists is that anthropologists can write, and sociologists can think, but they overcomplicate stuff. And for me, Geertz is always a good example to give students of how to write. And he said that one of the advantages of anthropology as a scholarly enterprise is that no one, including its practitioners, quite knows exactly what it is. Which I think it's a very nice thing to say after being one of the most prominent figures in anthropology. And I think it's a key that anthropology, contrary to other disciplines, has the ability to change and is always shifting. The downside is that we don't have anything to say for ourselves, because it's not like we have a body of materials like psychologists or economists or even sociologists. Okay, and in the same book he says, anthropology is a conflicted discipline, perpetually in search of ways to escape its condition, perpetually failing to find them. Committed, since its beginning, to a global view of human life, social, cultural, biological, and historical at once, it keeps falling into its parts, complaining about the fact and trying desperately and unsuccessfully to project some sort of new unity to replace the unity it imagines itself once to have had. but now through the faithlessness of present practitioners to have mindlessly cast away. So, just to start from the end, Maurice Bloch, who worked a lot with Geert, and if you don't know him, he's a great historian. And he wrote a piece about where did anthropology go? And in a way, that's a very good point to start, because when I started my postdoc at the Royal College of Art, I didn't know that design anthropology existed. So for me, it sounds like I'm sort of a fossil, but like I started my PhD in 2009, and the people at my university told me that design is not a scholarly discipline. So I couldn't do a PhD on design because it's not something that you should research. So obviously, because they were anthropologists. So just after I finished my PhD, I went to RCA, and there I found out that there are some people that call themselves design anthropologists. So there were, I don't know, about 10 in the UK and another 10 in Scandinavia, specifically in Denmark. And I visited them, and I kind of found out what it is. And I got a lot of hope, because I found out my home, and I said, okay, so design anthropology would be the next big thing. And everybody described it as such an emerging discipline. But then 10 years later, it kind of vanished in a way. So this whole lecture tries to define what it is, why it didn't work, and perhaps what could be the next step, which is what Alvisa and me are trying to define. Okay, so if you guys try and use ChatGPT to define what design anthropology is, which is some sort of an exercise I always do with students, you won't find any good answers, because like everything else, ChatGPT kind of warbles around the existing data but doesn't produce something new. Although in definitions, it's not bad. Okay, so you can see that some things here are okay, right? It's a field that combines elements of anthropology, study of human societies. I mean, it's a lot of words that doesn't say anything useful. But in a way, it says that design anthropology is a combination of design and anthropology, which is very stupid, but that's how it goes. So for me, right, after being in that field for, I don't know, at least 10 years, design anthropology is made out of 5 principles, and you'll see why social design for me kind of replaced it in a practical way. And if we jump to the end, Alvisa and me, we have a lot of discussions, but we agree on many things. And there was a major debate in anthropology: is it applied or is it not? Or could it be both ways? But for me, the answer is very, very clear. Design anthropology is only applied. If it's not applied, it doesn't have any right to exist. Okay, so 5 principles. The first one is that it deals with interpretation. So as Geertz mentioned very famously, we do a double phase of interpretation, right? We talk to people, we understand what they told us, and then we say or transform that data to designers or with designers. So a double stage of interpretation. Then there is the issue of temporality, which is that design, that there's always a tension that design is focused about the future and anthropology focused on the past or present. So design anthropology is doing both, right? So we are in the present, but we try to imagine what will come in the future, as all designers do. Then there's the issue of focus, right? Which we do both theory and practice. We do an intervention, so we always engage in social change, which is very important, and it deals with values and with politics in a way. And we always do collaborations. So we always work in participation with communities. We work with architects, with designers. And another thing that is very unique to design anthropology is that we work with all the disciplines of design, and we always have something to contribute. So for example, when I started teaching, I started at industrial design. Then I moved to inclusive design. Then I moved to architecture school and urban design. And now I'm working more with like digital information or visual communication. So I always obviously have a year to kind of figure out what the field has to offer, but then I have a base of knowledge that I can share with all these disciplines. Okay, so the first stop is 2007, and there, I don't know, perhaps it's too small, right? Yeah, okay. So I'll just read a few sentences, just one from each, because I did like an extensive overview of the literature, so you'll see it's like a journey in 15 years. But again, I'll send you the presentation if you find it interesting. So the first stop is Tim Ingold, who is a very famous British anthropologist, started with a question that back in 1992, it was the first time that social researchers mentioned that designers can work with social sciences because social scientists have the ability to do ethnography, which was a big find, right? And if we go historically a bit to the past, there was a massive shift in the history of design as a discipline from what was called B school, from a business school position, to social sciences, which happened in the end of the 80s and the beginning of the 90s, right? So the first stage was that we designers need anthropologists because they know how to do ethnography. And then Tim Ingold wrote in 2007 that anthropology is not ethnography. I mean, it's a part of it, but it's not the major issue or the major interest of design anthropology. And he says, the objective of anthropology, I believe, is to seek a generous, comparative, but nevertheless critical understanding of human being and knowing the one world we all inhabit. Okay, the objective of ethnography is to describe the lives of people. Okay, so it's a description tool, but it's not the same thing as the core principle of anthropology as a discipline. Okay, and again, it's even small for me from this distance, so I'll just go ahead. He says, you can see and touch a fellow human being, but have you ever seen or touched a society? Which is an interesting question, right? Because even for sociologists, it's difficult to define it. So now in social design, we say that we work with communities, but defining communities is a bit tricky, right? Like you all know. And he says this is a message that has critical implications for the way anthropology is taught. Too often, it seems to me, we disappoint our students' expectations. Rather than awakening their curiosity towards a social life or kindling in them an inquisitive mode of being, we force them into an endless reflection on disciplinary texts which are studied, not for the light they throw upon the world, but for what they reveal about the practice of anthropology, which is very important, because usually when I started teaching the introduction to anthropology and then I stopped because it was way too boring for design students, it was always, okay, let's start with Malinowski and what happened at First World War, and then the UK and Margaret Mead and all this kind of history. But it doesn't have any relevance for design students. Okay, so again, for me, the first time I understood this, I changed the whole way that I taught and even the subject matter. Okay, because anthropology can offer a kind of a view, but it's not only tools, right? And that's very important. So if we go to a different thinker, Willem Flusser, which I always like to quote, he says that a designer is someone who is artful or wily, a plotter setting traps, which is interesting, and it kind of takes us to a very, very brief history of design and where it went wrong, okay? And then you'll see where I'm leading you. So in the evolution of design, something happened when designers stopped providing functional solutions and started offering comfort. And comfort, you know, if you go to the theory of leisure, if you remember that from classic sociology, probably Alvisa knows that, then the moment that you talk about leisure and consumption, then things get a bit wrong, right? Because you don't actually need the objects that we tell you that you need. Okay? Like Steve Jobs, right? He has a few very famous quotes, and one of them, he says that the major aim of Apple is to create a desire for an object that 10 seconds ago it didn't know existed, which is very, very accurate in describing what Apple is, right? So what created this change? Okay, and in a different article, I do a research with a Hungarian colleague. We're both very depressed with our governments, and And we call it gray design, because gray design is kind of a philosophy that designers adopted and architects, in which they decide not to decide. Like they say, okay, we do practice, that's it. We don't get involved in politics, we don't have any ideology, we just work, we have a brief, we have clients, that's it. And we say that up to a few years ago it was okay in a way, but now designers just cannot stay in that area anymore. So what happened was probably three things. Okay, first one is romanticism, okay, which offered the excess of materials and started focusing on the ego of individual designers. Then Industrial Revolution introduced mass production, which is ego multiplied by 1,000,000. And then the latest thing, if you see there, it's what I call narrative design, which is, it was very popular like 10 years ago, but it's still going on. That it's interesting and relevant and important if I, the designer, say that it is, right? So like Jasper Morrison sells you a crate of wine, but he adds his signature and then he asks for 400 euros for that pleasure. Okay, so narrative design. It's not a wine crate, it's signed by Tom Dixon or Jasper Morrison or whatever. Okay, so if we see that, again, in the history of design, there were a few, glances of social design, but even the first or the major group that actually mentioned it didn't actually propose social solutions, right? I mean, they did an example, but it didn't create the effect that they wanted. Obviously, until Ulm arrived and perhaps the Frankfurt kitchen a few years afterwards. But in a way, Ulm were the first to actually introduce politics to design. Okay, which again, it's important because we'll see that that's one of the core, one of the raison d'etre of design anthropology is that we do think that politics and ideology and values are essential. Without that, we don't have anything to say. Right, and you can see, obviously, that, but if you compare the Bauhaus curriculum and Ulm curriculum, you see the differences because they were the first ones to introduce social sciences and critical thinking. They brought in lecturers from the Frankfurt School. Unfortunately, like happened in the Bauhaus, Maldonado, who was the second headmaster, kind of arrived in the wrong time of history, which he kind of... in some of the things he introduced, both practically and theoretically, he was too early. It was like 15 years too early in time. So he was too radical and the school closed. But its influence didn't break the wall of Germany. So if you ask most designers if they know something about Maldonado or the Ulm school, outside of Germany, probably they won't. I don't know, in Italy, apparently, yes, but outside of these two countries, very, very rarely. Okay, so as a result, designers tended to focus on marketing, right, and making people buy stuff that they know that they don't need, avoiding what later was being termed wicked problems, and acting as draggers and not leaders. So, okay, we're going with the flow. That's kind of this, there's a trend, we follow the trend, we follow clients, but not as leaders. Okay, and obviously if you know a bit of design theory, then these things changed in the 1990s with people like Buchanan and Margolin and obviously Maldonado and Papanek and all these people. Okay, so why do I mention that? Because in a way, that was the basis for what is now called social design. And social design, and you see there's a lot of parallels between social design and design anthropology as we want to see it. So first of all, social design versus other types of design deals with wicked problems, okay? That's the major thing that we say that we want to do, right? So in the social design network, we try to tackle wicked problem, okay? Refugees, hunger, in some cases, war zones are very interesting for us, but it's always deals with politics and with values, and in most cases, the solution is not economically viable. I mean, we're not in it for the money. It's always socially oriented and culturally concrete, right? We always do a specific context. We always do research. It's non-profit, as you can see. And we always deal with social change and social justice. And as you can see, again, Papanek wrote it very, very eloquently 50 years ago. He said that the major, point of, he talked about graphic designers, but I think it was relevant even now, right? That the major raison d'être of designer is to persuade people to buy things they don't need with money they don't have, to impress others that don't care, right? And I think it's good to present that also to students, because in some cases they have this romantic, image of what designers do. They win awards, they win the Red Dot, they go to Milan Design Week, but it's a bit more than that. Okay, so again, if we kind of summarize all the things that we said, that and you see that why design anthropology is still relevant is that objects, when we try to decipher them in an intricate way, we always use a decoding system. If you remember Stuart Hall, we always involve the process of communication, right? Through the object, by the object. Obviously, Alvise is an expert on Bruno Latour, so that's a part of what he said. We always do interpretation, as we mentioned before. There's always a phase of evolution, right, from one stage to the other. There's always a connection between the community and the individual, and there are always cultural aspects of design. Okay, so if we summarize it from a historical point of view, then we start in the beginning of the 90s or the end of the 80s with Design for Inclusivity, which happened in the UK, right? If you remember, there was a big exhibition that was called Design for the 90%. Then we go to IDEO, we're the first big influential company to introduce social sciences to design teams, which again gave rise, in my opinion, to a big problem that they also offer design thinking, which I hate. And I even wrote a chapter in a book that was called Why Do I Hate Design Thinking? But it was very, very popular, everybody knows it. And then there was the rise of design anthropology in roughly 2010. Economic crisis, right? 8 years later, disasters, right? COVID, the war in Ukraine, which I think one of the schisms was that, if you remember, at the the 2 years of COVID, the major design venue in Milan was canceled, and people kind of rose up the next morning and saw that nothing happened, that the world still exists, which rose a lot of questions. Do we need this kind of famous venue, and what's the purpose of it? And then the rise of populist government, which is very, very obviously bad for everyone, but specifically for humanistic, open-ended, liberal thinkers, which is the major part of what anthropology is. So again, what's our role, right? So the classic roles of design anthropology, as I see that, again, is that we need to supply designers with, or I think that was more what it was at the beginning, right? So offering qualitative research methods, offering an intricate look as outsiders, right? I don't know if you remember or ever working with, in studios of design, it's always, tell me what you think, right? You don't know design. I mean, I always value your opinion as someone that doesn't know anything about design, which was the things that I heard at the beginning. And then serving as a moral compass, right? You're an anthropologist. Do you think what we're doing is good or wrong, right? From an ethical point of view. And then offering unique theories, right? So anthropologists, again, versus cognitive psychologists that have their own very limited and closed, base of theory. We have the ability to appropriate and use different types of theories according to the situation in which we find ourselves. Okay, so one of the problems, as I see it, is that at the beginning, 15 years ago, there was a shortage of of a very unique point of view that will help design, right? Which is obviously a major human activity that we need. So at the beginning, designers, or more specifically design anthropologists, kind of went into different types of bodies of knowledge and appropriated them to create something new. So for example, in my PhD, there was no design anthropology, so people told me, okay, read some STS, read cultural anthropology, like the classics, go to material culture, visual culture, and actor network theory, consumer culture, cultural studies, right, which I did. Okay, even art history, because I didn't know, there was no specific body of knowledge. But then again, after we appropriated this kind of various and multi-layered theoretical background, a very crucial thing happened, that design culture happened like 5 or 8 years, no, even more. I mean, Guy Julier published his book in, I think, 2013, and social design started to flourish, right? Because humanity was killing itself and we needed something concrete that wasn't occupied with making money. So if you can think about it visually, a lot of bodies, small bodies of knowledge kind of recuperated and joined to become design anthropology, but then fractured because we needed it, right? If you remember the paradigm cycle, right, in sociology. And again, for me, 2 major books that I always go back to with the students are The Social Life of Things and Mary Douglas and Isherwood. But again, both of these, classic or now classic books, which are very, very important, don't actually deal with design. I mean, it's either consumption or material culture, which is very, very, very different. Okay, so for example, if you remember that Apaduai, if you don't, I mean, just read this book, it's still very relevant. So Apaduai was the first to acknowledge that not every object is an object of commodification, right? And he gives the example of a wedding ring and adopted babies, right? And Kopitov, who, again, I always like to read, offer the notion of the cycle of life of objects, which is currently being revived through sustainability issues, right, and ecology, right, cradle to cradle, but that was the base, right, because he said that every object that we buy has kind of a cycle of life, right? And, he talked about memories that objects accumulate and all that. Okay, and also from an economic point of view. And again, then 2011, Alison Clark published an edited volume which he mentioned a shift towards cultural sensitivity through ethnography, etc., etc. Alvisa, how are we regarding time? 10 minutes? 10 minutes. Okay. All right. Okay, so I'll just go through that. And again, if you want, I'll send you the presentation. Okay, so again, this book was reprinted with a second edition last year, so it's still relevant. Some of the papers or the chapters are still very good, right? There's one on poetic observation. There's a very important one of Arturo Escobar, who writes about the anthropological imagination, and he's doing a lot of research in Colombia. Then a year later, Wendy Gunn and Jared Donovan published this book, which still is very relevant, and they offer the model of the DA, the big D, you remember that? DA with big letters or small letters. So in very summarized fashion, right? Either we do design of anthropology or anthropology of design or anthropology for design. Which again, it sounds very simplistic, but again, when I started my PhD, I had 2 instructors. One was a very famous industrial designer, and the other one was a very famous anthropologist. And the anthropologist told me, okay, I'll offer you some guidance in anthropology, but I know nothing about design. And the designer, he was a professor, but in Israel, you can be a professor without a PhD if you're a practitioner. So he said, okay, I can guide you in design, but I know nothing about PhD. So I kind of found myself between 2 chairs. But I did manage to go and work a bit with Wendy Gunn. And my instructor told me, okay, you do a classic thing. You just treat designers as a tribe, and you do an ethnography, and you talk about design. And I told her, it's not interesting. It's boring for me. It's not a tribe. they have influence on all of humanity. So I want to do something else. I want to do applied anthropology. I want to do anthropology with design or for design, right? So again, this model is still very relevant, and it's the first chapter in this book. And again, there's a lot of sketches that you can use in this presentation, ethnomethodology, participatory design, design anthropology. All these things have similarities, right? But differences also. So again, I'll send it to you. I'm sorry that I'm kind of rushing it, but I want to show you the last part, which I think would be more interesting. Right, so a year afterwards, they published another book. And then they said the main aim of anthropology, like in most academic disciplines, is to produce generalizations and theories about human societies based on, but reaching beyond the particularities of ethnographic case studies. Right? Again, interesting. Then I published 2 articles in Design in Action. The first one, I kind of asked what's the role of designers in society. I was very pessimistic after my postdoc. I said that my research question in my PhD was, what can designers do to change society? And the answer was nothing, because they didn't want to. But the optimistic part was that they do have potential to do it if they work differently. And then I started thinking about social design, right? And then I wrote, I think, is an interesting piece with Joan Bischout, who was my instructor at the RCA. And then we kind of offered the notion of what social design should be, right? It was 8 years ago, and it had 5 attributes, right? It's based on the end users. It's not redesigned, but something new. It's context related. It's inclusive. It's lengthy, which means that we need to know how to do research. And I think it still has relevance, right? After 8 years. Okay. And then Design Future came out a few years later. And the last one was this one, which was published in 2018. Again, it's very, very basic. So if you have students that are interested in design anthropology, I would give them that. It's very short. It's less than 100 pages. But it offers a lot of insight to people that are not classically, anthropologists in their upbringing or education. Okay, so again, I'm just leafing through that. I'm going to just end this overview with Tim Ingold again. And then an example, right? So if, images are coming, okay? So don't give up. So Tim Ingold said that anthropology is not just good for this or that. It is good, period. It is good because it brings the wisdom and experience of people from every region of our planet and from every walk of life into a conversation around the question that concerns us all of how to live, not just presently, but in times to come. No other discipline does that. Many other disciplines study people, history, psychology, medicine, to name a few, but these disciplines treat what people know and do as beliefs and practices, to be recorded and analyzed. This is what ethnography does too, but anthropology is different. For in anthropology, we don't just study people, we study with people. This means drawing them into the conversation. It is no longer a conversation confined within the walls of academy about the many worlds of those who live beyond them. With anthropology, the walls themselves come down. The very world we inhabit, the one world we all share, becomes our place of study. It sounds a bit cliche, but it has some wisdom in this, I think. Because again, anthropology is good. I think anthropology is one of the last disciplines to really, be based on a classic humanistic, 18th century values. And again, in the world that we live in, and unfortunately I don't see anything drastically changing, it's becoming very rare for people to say their mind and actually stand up for values. Okay, so just as a last example, okay, so 2 years ago I published a book which looks like this. I'm gonna come back to this in a second. Okay, just one slide that I'm gonna come back. So I have a studio that I have been teaching with a colleague who is an industrial designer, and we've been teaching this course for 15 years. And in this course, we started out, and you see why I give that as a nice example, because we started out this course, again, 15 years ago as one of the toughest courses for students, because it dealt with wood, and as you know, wood for industrial designers is not an easy task. And we focused on creating nice objects, because everybody likes wood, and the cultures are very exotic, right? It's Japan, and specific tribes in Africa, and the Shakers, so it's interesting, it's not local. But then a shift happened. Okay, so we chose 3 cultures in which wood has a cultural ability or a cultural embeddedness in them, right? Because obviously Scandinavia also has a lot of wood in their culture, but these are 3 very unique cultures that obviously Africa is not a culture, but a multitude of cultures. But in Western and Southern Africa, wood has cultural and social meanings. Obviously in Japan it has philosophical meanings, and the Shakers propose religious meanings, right, from a very strict Protestant ethos. So 3 cultures. And even the actual material itself has intricate cultural values, okay? So you don't only choose 1 or 2 cultures, but you also need to choose a specified and relevant type of timber. Okay, so for example, and what we started to do with the students was that obviously we told them that we don't copy, right? We don't appropriate other cultures, so we don't design for these cultures, but we take or we learn their values and we design something for ourselves. So during these years, we started to receiving very interesting projects from the students. Like one Palestinian student designed a jewelry made of wood, but made out of practices that are common in Ethiopia, which is interesting. Another one designed a Jewish kind of object that was made specifically with Japanese techniques, which was interesting. So again, if you see that, it looks like a Rietveld chair, but it's actually made out of 2 different pieces. That one is made out of Japanese joinery, the upper one, and the lower one is a specific configuration in Malawi. So again, it's not copying, but it's interpretation. So the second stage was learning that what we actually do is interpretation, which is classic anthropology in design. Then we started getting these things. So we see a criticism. So after like 5 years, projects started to get political, right? So femininity, the place of women in religious communities in Israel, equality, social justice, right? So the geisha stages of upbringing in traditional Japan, but the actual techniques are from the Shakers. So the Shakers in this story were more tolerant and more feminist, obviously, than Japan, because if you know a bit about Japan, even today, it's not very tolerant towards women, right? So these are not just beautiful objects anymore, but these are objects for political criticism. And the last part is that it offered also a vista for empathy. So we started learning that students came over and said, okay, so these cultures are strange, but they're not stranger than our own cultures. So perhaps both cultures are not logical anymore. And we told them, okay, that's a very good position to ask questions. Okay, that's the classic anthropology. It's like, right, alienating the known and knowing the alien, right? So just ask questions about your own community. Is it logical that women are treated this way, or do you think perhaps that we can do things differently, right? So this is a traditional Japanese kotatsu, but if IKEA would produce it. Okay, and body imagery. So feminine body, what is the norm in each culture, and perhaps it could be different. Perhaps each one can decide on their own. Perhaps society doesn't have that strong hold on us. A lot of projects about death and mourning, and the only topic that nobody talks about, but the only relevant one for all of us, which is death. So let's talk about death through Buddhism or through Zen. Okay, and again, IKEA. Students started learning about Tao and about Buddhism, which was great, and started asking questions about, let's say, how would Islamic calligraphy correlate with the traditional Japanese calligraphy, or what would look like a combination between Buddhism and Judaism, which is very interesting, right? So again, we can go from a classic Japanese chess pieces to ultra-Orthodox pieces and the role of women, if you can see that. Right. So again, I think just before I finish that, if we just take the last slide, that if we offer a new view on anthropology, then I kind of think that anthropology needs to go back to what Levi-Strauss called the bricoleur. And the bricoleur for me is, again, we just had a discussion on that yesterday, is that a sort of a mobile library. So an anthropologist, a bit contrary to other disciplines, has a lot of tools. It's like a Swiss Army knife. And according to each situation that we find ourselves, we offer something that is needed. But it's always stemming from the same specific worldview, which is always liberal, humanistic in its nature. But we have a lot of tools and we can offer insights in a lot of situations. So we always criticize, right? We always ask questions. Why do you do that as you do it? Why? We always try to innovate research, right? So if we don't have the needed methodology, we can invent one. It's always applied, as I mentioned before, right? We can shift between scales, right? As I mentioned before, I can work with urban designers on a city scale, but I can also work in a micro, level with typographers. There's always the notion of experience. We always need to be in the field ourselves. We need to see things. We cannot just stay in the office and just write about. We actually need to live what people live. And there's always the question of translation. We always shift between notions. We always interpret. We always take into consideration various points of view, which is very important. So again, I think design anthropology still has a place. I think it's still important. I think it still has something to contribute, but I think it needs to change. So that's my last point. And again, if you guys have any questions, I would happy to answer.
Okay, thank you very much, Jonathan, for this trajectory through the history of design anthropology and also the relations with social design, and also for showing us a project related to teaching. Maybe during the discussion we can also talk about other projects, not related to teaching, like the one of bespoke design. I don't know if you have
Sure.
Some image of that. So I open to the discussion, but maybe just to break the ice and ask a first question. So, I mean, your presentation was somehow, it was this trajectory of design anthropology. I mean, its history, the reason why somehow emerged, but also there was also this issue of social design, no? And we saw at the end, like, somehow social design is taking in part the role of design anthropology. So probably one of the things that we can start with is if you can clarify the relation that you see between design anthropology and social design. And what I was thinking, looking at your presentation and also thinking about, let's say, what I did in the field of social design, especially before coming to Politecnico, but when I was in Bolzano, it seems to me that design anthropology is a method or the method in order to carry out social design. But this is my this is what I would start with this question, and then we can open to the
sure. That's a very good question. Actually, I'll answer perhaps in two venues, and you'll see where we go. First of all, again, I don't know if I mentioned it, but I'm in my position, I am responsible for all of theory in my school, so it's 25% of all the degrees. And I have close to 2,000 students and 50 staff members. And again, 10 or 12 years ago, and again, I don't know if it's the same thing in Italy, most people that came and taught theory in design schools were either usually art historians or philosophers, which these were the theoreticians that were available at that time. And I think that created some sort of problems, because designers in this decade kind of grew up on people that didn't know anything about design. They know about aesthetics in some cases, they know about art, but they didn't know anything about architecture or design. And that's something that I try to rectify by instructing my own PhD students that have a design, at least a BA in design. So in the last few years, there's a lot of disciplines that try to offer these kind of bodies of knowledge. So we have design theory, we have design research, we have inclusive design, we have design for, humanity, it was called at once. So first of all, the actual pedagogic approach changed, but still, I think a major problem of anthropology is that in the cases that they offer design anthropology, they kind of labeled it just as all the other, options available to anthropology students. So you can do, as I told you, I started in anthropology of religion in my MA. So they told me, like you have anthropology of religion and you have anthropology of geography, you have anthropology of design. But it's totally not the same, because design has an influence on everyone on the planet. So for me, it should have been the most important part of anthropology. But again, there's a huge debate, or at least it was. And I think that's one of the reasons why anthropology is fading, because academia didn't want anthropology to become applied, because it wasn't academic, right? The classic notion where I grew up was that anthropology should be, you should be at your ivory tower, just go for a few months and visit your research communities, but then come back to the library and publish articles that nobody reads. But it's a big debate. If we say that anthropology either becomes applied and then survives, or stays as it is and vanishes, then for me the solution is obvious. But I think there were a lot of problems in the very definition of what design anthropology is. I don't know if I answered your question, but yeah.
No. Yes. Still, in my opinion, is still open the relation with let's say social design anthropology more as a method, or a methodology in the sense of a discourse about method, which includes theory and so on, for doing a certain kind of design or something else. So, no, I've been told that there is a lot of I don't know how to say in English, echo. So maybe we can stop using microphones.
Yeah, sure.
Also because
You can just
and maybe you can come closer.
Huh? Oh yeah.
Yeah, we are recording.
Yeah. Oh, it's okay. If you guys just can come closer, and then we can have a discussion.
Yeah, clearly the microphone.
Yeah.
Okay, but
One of the something for
maybe we can also stop recording and
Yeah,
start discuss.
yeah, exactly.
Let's do
one of the put on
I'm not interested to be recorded, but I think it's very interesting, the recordings and also the discussion. So if you agree, maybe, because we can deepen some aspect of this presentation, the discussion. So if I think to my student that in October will start to study anthropology, apply anthropology, maybe they are interested in this discussion. So if you agree, we can keep using the microphone.
Perhaps I'll just add one thing relating to what Alvise asked before. I think one of the problems, and perhaps it could be an advantage that anthropologists bring to designers, is that we don't have answers, but we have really good questions. And I think for some designers, at least again 10 years ago, it was very frustrating, right? Because they need answers. Usually they would tell me, okay, so what should this line, I don't know, again with the transportation studio, what should this station for the train look like? And I was like, I don't know. I mean, let me ask some people, do questionnaires, and then I'll have an answer. So usually the answer for that was, okay, so you have a week. And I was like, no, I mean, right? Because anthropology, I need a year and I need questionnaires. But again, obviously it's not that way. So as I said, it needs to change, but it's not, we shouldn't, sell everything that we believe in. But I think the major advantage of anthropology is that we ask really good questions, right? So perhaps you don't need a station. Just think that, let's say car designers are there's a lot of very bad descriptions of designers of cars, and I won't say that. But usually there's a certain hierarchy of these people in the world of design. But usually they deal with shapes, right? And the question they ask is, for example, even now, right? So what should be the next electric car? But I always tell them, okay, so the question is not what should the next electric car look like, but what should the next train that will replace these 1,000 cars look like? Because we don't need more cars. We need better public transportation, right? So it's not an evolution like in classic design that you have a Tesla Model 3 and then a Tesla Model 4 and then Model 6. So, yeah.
Thank you, Jonathan.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you for your presentation. I'm a moral philosopher, so maybe my question is very naive. But so the question is about disagreement in moral value, and is about the conflict in the moral value. Because during your presentation, at a certain point you mentioned that some classical roles of design anthropology, and you said that one of these classic roles is serving as a moral compass. Okay. So as a philosopher, so my question is, in some circumstances, it's quite difficult to give a certain of hierarchy of value, or it's very difficult us to decide which moral values is more relevant than in the other.
Yeah.
So, so the question is about this: how we can deal with this kind of disagreement in value in the process of a design.
Yeah, that's an excellent question. So first of all, again, one of the changes that happened, again, and I didn't mention it, is that there is a kind of a new field that is called design ethics. So even that was a part of what anthropologists, classically did, was replaced by designers that do ethics, which one of our colleagues in design, the Social Design Network, is a graphic designer that became, he did a PhD in philosophy, and he's an ethicist. But I think, again, if I'll take the Social Design Network as an example, I personally believe that you cannot do social design without a core value that you define. It can change for every group, right? Like Cumulus has a certain one, and ESA has their own values, but we defined our core values. But I think it's possible, since we're all doing it pro bono, that we're all employed by our, by academic institutions. So a major, point of friction for us is that we never have money. So, and actually we do have a form that if a partner from industry wants to work with us and give us money, they need to sign on our core values. So for example, I don't know if it ever happens, but if Facebook will come and say, okay, here $10 million and let us be your sponsor, we will not work with them. But again, I know, and again, I've written a paper on that with that colleague, that designers also need to pay mortgages and pay for their electric bills. So I think it's a bit naive. And it was naive on my part at the beginning to think that designers can just work wherever they think that is appropriate, etc. But I do think that every designer that works in real life needs to have some sort of guiding lines. Because again, the times that we live in are just, you just don't have the choice. And again, as I mentioned before, the gray zone is very comfortable to live in. But at some point, you will get to a wall that will make you decide if you're on that side or the other. And again, in social design, you just don't have any other choice. But I think it will get to other... It's like Zaha Hadid. You remember that there's a quote that I always find very offensive, that she said, when they had Qatar, the soccer tournament, right? And if I remember it correctly, 2,000 workers died on the sites that she designed. And there's a famous interview, and the journalist asked her, what do you think about that? And she said, practically, I don't care. I'm an architect. People that die there, that's the problem of the site manager or whatever. I don't know. Perhaps for these kind of architects it can work, but I think every decision that we make in design has some influence on many other people. Again, so I hope I answered your question. Yeah.
Just because not all the people who are here are come from the design and know the design.
Yeah.
So I mean, Jonathan was referring to the sort of moral code of some association related to design. So he was mentioning Cumulus, which is an association related to the design education, and he was mentioning I guess Design Research Society probably, and then he was mentioning the Social Design Network. So he was addressing the question from, let's say, the moral code of the various association, and then and the fact that, for instance, in the Social Design Network specifically, there is a moral code, and so just to clarify, I mean, some of the names in order to for those of you who are not into the field of design.
Yeah.
Okay, Christian.
Jonathan, thank you very much. Your presentation make me think about these last 15 years of practice in design anthropology and social design. So let me say that I totally agree with you when you say that, and with you and with Alvise, because you say that more or less design anthropology is an approach, a methodology, or a method to make a better social design. So I totally agree, but from the perspective of my practice, but I've read all the books you showed, and I remember that I was reading these books looking for some answer. In particular, in the first years of the practice, where when we were me and Valentina Porcellana, an anthropologist from University of Turin, and we work experiencing something that maybe was design anthropology, but we don't know the name. So then we start reading the books, all the paper where something was written about design anthropology, but we didn't find the answer. Maybe because there is no answer. Some answer we found the answer in the practice, in the experience, of these years. So maybe I agree with you that there is no answer. I agree that the design anthropology is an approach, a method, and we try to share this point of view with our student. You know that we teach social designer and designer for social impact in the field of food system and the field of social issues. So is a key part of our teaching design anthropology. Is a key part that view of apply anthropology. So thank you very much, because it was a way to look at the past and also a look at the present and the future of our teaching. I was interested when I read your the title of your presentation about the fall. So if you can explore a little bit more that concept of fall of design anthropology.
Yeah, for sure. Again, I think first of all that again from a personal point of view of knowing these people is that I think their approach, their starting point was very problematic, because as I mentioned before, it was basically in Denmark and in the UK, and I think the UK, and again I have a lot of friends there, but I think they're the last nation to say anything about pluralistic or community values or post-colonialism relating to their history. But I think in some cases the problem of the fall was that a lot of practices of design kind of took over what anthropology classically offered. So again, for example, for me it was always stupid that designers told me that what they do is human-centered design, because for me it was like a psychologist boasting that they work with people. I mean, obviously that's what you should do. But I think social design is different than user research or human-centered design, because we don't focus on making a profit at the end. So I think there are differences, but even service design in a way came out or have parallel things with design anthropology. Obviously design ethics, obviously social design. But just think about non-design as a concept. For me, it came out of anthropology, because it's the ability to criticize designers and say, okay, fine, we did the research, but now we just do nothing. We can do something which would be very expensive, but why should we? Let the people just continue doing. We'll give them some advice, but in these cases, even non-designers can do design. So I think that's a thing that came out of anthropology. What Alvisa mentioned before of bespoke design in healthcare, which is something that I deal with a bit, came out of anthropology, because it means that it talks about equality, about offering the same level of services to everyone. So I think if you go deeper and the intricacies of design practice, you will find footprints of design anthropology. But I think as a discipline, it kind of took the wrong turn, I think, and just became irrelevant, I think. Or perhaps it woke up too late or whatever. But I think the beginning was problematic, because most of the designers that led the way weren't in design. They came from material culture or more theoretical design or anthropology. So I think these kind of internal and external processes happened in the same thing that kind of left no choice to design anthropology, and I think it's just either evaporated or didn't adapt, in a Darwinistic point of view. But I think it still has something to offer, obviously. But as I mentioned before, design anthropology is not ethnography, and it's not, a general kind of thinking method. But unfortunately, I don't have a very specific answer. Perhaps in a few months we'll have a paper ready, and Nicole.
Many thanks, Jonathan, for your interesting presentation and introduction to design anthropology, which is, as you said, a very hard to describe field, I would say, if it's right to say that it should be described, or defined. Many things that you said somehow resonated what I would hear basically every day during an experience I undertook, a doctoral research visit at the Stadtlabor for Multimodal Anthropology in Berlin, where there were these two or more anthropologists like Ignacio Farias, Tomás Sánchez Criado, who were constantly asking themselves how to bridging the gap between different fields like anthropology and design or urban design. Because, I remember Ignacio Farias, he would always say things like, we know that anthropology it's the most self-sabotaging discipline ever. Mm-hmm. We keep asking ourselves many questions. And so they were basically, the questions they were asking themselves during those meetings were things like, how can we rethink our role when dialoguing with designers or urban designers, and stop being seen as observers or describers or maybe information providers to help designers designing better objects, for people. And they were thinking about multimodal ways of doing ethnography. And that was a way of, approximating themselves to designers, tools and means of doing research.
Yeah.
Of course, that resonated also with some STS literature. For instance, I'm thinking about Alex Wilkie and Norty Mara's book, Inventing the Social, that basically says that you can never just be outside the social and describe it, but you always intervene the social. Yeah. And you could also, maybe experiment with designers' means and tools to intervene the social. So what do you think about that? It's just a question, just for curiosity. What do you think about this multimodal ways of doing ethnography, bridging the gap between anthropology and design, or architecture as well?
Yeah, I think first of all, for me the first instance that I kind of figured out what's happening is that again in the last 10 years, at the beginning I proudly presented myself as a design anthropologist, but then I figured out that more and more people know nothing about what I'm talking about. So I started describing myself as a design researcher, and then everyone understood. So I think designers, again, ethnography, we're always going back to ethnography, but I think for me, there's like 3 major courses that I teach for different levels. So I have design theory, I have design research, and I have social design. So in each one of them, there are traces of design anthropology, but I don't think there is still relevance of, again, I'm talking about Israel. Perhaps it's the same here, I don't know. First of all, I think it's the only country that I met so many design anthropologists, but because there I'm the only one. But again, I think we offer insights, but I do teach students user mapping and user journey from service design in one lesson, and the next lesson could be ethnography. But I'm not saying that we do design anthropology, because it's a part of it. But again, I think that if I can teach them what it means to think like an anthropologist, then I think it's more valuable than the actual research methods, because there's the IDEO design key, there's a lot of options out there. But I think thinking as a designer, as an anthropologist, gives them an edge, right? As I mentioned before, because I can work with the community and then arrive to the conclusion that we don't need any intervention, right? Or again, if I speak about bespoke design or bespoke healthcare, then you understand what I mean. But classic designers won't, because for them it's the same thing, right? Because if I say if someone has one leg but needs to feel like someone cares about them and needs to offer them solution to be like everyone else, that's an anthropological idea. It's not a design idea, right? Again, I always give an example that I worked a few years in a rehabilitation wing in a hospital. And once there was a 19-year-old patient with one leg, and he came over and he asked me, what the hell am I doing there? And I told him I'm an anthropologist. And he told me, okay, so you're here to look at us? And I said, no, I'm here to speak and see what's wrong with your situation. And he says, okay, I have something for you. And I asked, okay, why? And he says, okay, I have a motion, it's called in Israel, a motion doctor, right? And my prosthetic leg is suitable only for Adidas shoes, sneakers. And I like Nike. I have a Jordan, and they don't fit. So I have a problem. But I talk to the physician, and he tells me, okay, just say thanks that you can walk. I mean, who cares about your Nike? And for me, it was the exact, difference between a designer and a physicist or a doctor. Because for a doctor, he focuses on making the guy walk. But a good designer will not only do that, but offer him the whole thing surrounding that, right? So if he likes Nike, fine, right? It's like the famous prosthetic leg for a ballerina, right? If a ballerina has just one leg, why should she dance? But that's exactly why she should, because designers need to bring her the option of going back to her previous life, right? Although it's not economical and nobody will make profit out of it. But that's, for me, an anthropological point of view, right? So again, I think we need again to navigate and see what we can take out of these classic anthropological texts. But again, I think someone needs to either offer something new, or perhaps offer a link between all these kind of new practices. But perhaps design anthropology should only be in the PhD level, or as an added program for practitioners in design or architecture. I don't know. But again, we have to think about it. Because again, I see in Israel that when I studied my BA in anthropology, we had 250 students in year one. Now they have around 50. So, but I think all these kind of disciplines like art history have the same, like humanities, they have the same problems. So either we sell our soul to the devil, or we redefine what we do. I think that's the only options I see. Or we just, say that anthropology is over and that's it.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with you. It's actually quite hard to think about that in terms of academic careers, because, we are kind of stuck in the middle of completely different and separated disciplinary fields. So it's really hard to create these new hybrid spaces.
Yeah, but again, I think perhaps if there's no place for a department of design anthropology, I think there is a place for a design anthropologist in every department of design, which I think is better, because for the students, mainly for BA and MA, they kind of felt like they go to, beyond enemy lines and now it's in their own department. So I think it's better. Like I teach in a classic MA course in design, multi-level design or whatever, or urban design. And I'm a part of the faculty, so I'm not an external person that come over and has some strange ideas. And I know about design, so I can talk about the briefs and how they work, etc. So again, I think we need to reflect on where should students meet anthropology, design anthropologists, and in what kind of scope and scale. I think so. Yeah.
Any other question? Daniel?
Yeah. Thanks a lot, Jonathan, for your presentation. Maybe getting back to what Alvis was saying at the beginning, I'm still struggling to understand how you really differentiate social design and design anthropology to a certain extent, because so I understand the gesture to anchor social practices into the design, which to me is also what social design is about. So in some aspects, that's something maybe I have not understood everything, but I still struggle to understand that. And thanks for what you just said about the numbers of students who are decreasing regarding anthropology, because I was also puzzled by the fact that you were saying, okay, basically anthropology is dying or is experiencing a sort of a crisis, which from the research perspective is not that much visible, in the sense that anthropology has also expanded to other fields like anthropology of the environment, industrial anthropology and things of that nature, that also broaden the scope of what anthropologists can do. And so design anthropology is one of the ways, if we follow you, to revitalize anthropology, but maybe not the only one in that sense. And so I was a bit puzzled by that idea of anthropology experiencing a form of crisis, but I think you already answered with the numbers of students decreasing in at least in the case of Israel.
Yeah, no, it's okay. I think again, going back to there's a major crossroad that I felt, and I mentioned it before, that either design anthropology is applied or it's not, or it could be both. And most of the people that I spoke with in the UK told me, yes, it's theoretical. We just do research and we go back to the university. But I think it cannot be. It can be only applied, because it's not like the others. Like if you research religion, fine. And again, for me personally, it was very hard, because again, as I mentioned, when I worked with Palestinians, I told them, okay, let's do a revolution, because there were like 100,000 Greek Orthodox Christians, Palestinians, that were ruled by 5, people from Greece. And I told them, okay, let's do a revolution. I started thinking about how to do that, and my instructor told me, what the hell are you doing? I mean, it's not your job. Anthropology is, you learn something, you share your values, and you go back. You don't change society. And I think that's exactly what we have to do in design. And I think we did it so successfully that, as you say, it got integrated into a lot of venues of design, which kind of made us a bit obsolete in a way, right? They kind of used us and then took over in a way. So that's what I'm saying, that perhaps we need to reflect on where should students meet us or meet design anthropology, what kind of stage, and perhaps without the flag that we have a discipline, but perhaps we're just professionals that work inside, design departments. I think so. But just think again about the difference between architecture and urban design, again, at least in Israel. Usually I don't like to work with architects because they don't understand people in a way. And urban designers and even landscape architects have that tendency. So even inside different, types of design departments, you can see that some of them are more inclined towards the social and some of them are not, like engineering, right? In some cases, we can work, more efficiently with engineers, and in some departments, less so. Yeah.
Anyone else? Okay, so for closing, maybe I would like to go back to 2 questions that emerged. So first of all, to the question of Mikko Rispoli, because Mikko Rispoli we work together in a design project, in a project where we have one design side and one anthropological side. And I don't know if we do design anthropology, but in any case, we have this dialogue between disciplines. And one of the issues that we understood, in this project, we give a lot of relevance to ethnography as a method in order to learn from the others. And we understood we are working with engineers. And at a certain point, we understood that somehow we need to make engineers sensitive to ethnography. So how can we make an engineer interested and somehow sensitive to ethnography, that he considers that ethnography is a tool for his job? I mean, and so we started to think, okay, we have to design some sort of dispositive, some sort of device that will make engineer interested in ethnography, which is a daunting job in a way, somehow. So somehow, getting back to what also Nicole was asking, we are trying to understand how somehow design can help doing ethnography in another way. So my question here is, do you have example of not so much of providing anthropological knowledge to design, but of design knowledge that becomes useful to do ethnography?
Yeah, sure. Actually, I have a great example. A few months or perhaps last year, as I mentioned before, in that transportation design studio, we were invited to inspect the final model of a station, a light train station, and there were 25 people there, engineers, designers, the people from the plant that were producing these stations. And one of them came over and said proudly, this is inclusive. We thought about disabled people with, blind people, etc., etc. And I asked him, okay, so show me, where's the disabled part? And he told me, okay, there's a plaque in Braille that blind people can touch and see what line is coming. So I told him, okay, first that there's two problems. First of all, 80% of blind people don't use Braille anymore. So they don't learn it because they have an app that says what's going on. So perhaps you need something digital and not this plaque. But secondly, just go over to the station and touch this Braille plaque and tell me what's happened. And he goes over, touches it, and comes back with blood pouring out of his hand because some of the build of it wasn't smooth enough. So I told him, how do you build something for people to touch when you can get hurt of it? And he told me, wow, that's so interesting. How didn't I think about it beforehand? And I told him, I don't know, but that's exactly what design research is about, or design anthropology, or whatever. So I think both engineers, and I think it was the same thing for designers 10 years ago, is that they know or they learn about anthropology through practice. That's exactly what I'm saying. It's not like you say, okay, we have a design department, an anthropology department, and we'll tell you, but we will work inside design departments, and you'll see why you need us. Through practice. So I think that's the only way that it works. And again, at the beginning, students used to have one day that they learn theory. And I told them that that's completely wrong, because then they see that it's not relevant for them. It's like a different day, but they need to get theory throughout practice. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Do you want to?
Yeah. Thank you. So, yeah.
Thank you so much for your, for your response to what Alvise asked. But perhaps, I'm not sure, but this sounds more like anthropology for design and not anthropology through design.
I think...
or design for anthropology or ethnography, I would say.
Again, I think it can be both. But I think... again, it's some notions that perhaps it's only, my own opinion. But I think we had the primordial sin that we thought that we're important enough that people will need us for what we were before, like anthropology for anthropology. And I think we just need to come out of that tree and say, okay, anthropology is very good. And again, that's something that I tell my own lecturers, that this is a design school. It's not a university. It's not a department of anthropology. And we don't do anthropology for the sake of anthropology. And I think that's why it's dying. And that's why humanities are dying, perhaps, because people lost contact with what's relevant and what's not. Again, just think about a design student that will learn for a whole semester about Geertz and Malinowski and Levi-Strauss. They don't care about these people and the history of anthropology. I used to do that for one semester, and then I woke up and I told myself, what's going on here? It's not interesting to anyone. But they should learn about these people through what they do, right? So you can tell them, okay, in this case, for example, Margaret Mead could be very relevant because she used to speak about gender and, you know, all these kind of topics, and it's relevant for, you know, pinkwashing and all that. So I always take that through design practice or architecture, because again, I don't think we have the privilege of staying in that lane, because everything changed. It's not the 80s anymore, and again, I think also because designers influence everyone on the planet, then we cannot leave that important discipline and not offer some, you know, guidance or, you know, extra knowledge that they need. So again, I think we need to be humble and just think about our role and what we should define ourselves. But again, perhaps it's only me, I don't know. That's my opinion.
If there isn't anyone else, I just would like to ask you a last question to connect into what Vera was asking.
Mm-hmm.
And then I guess we can close if there is no one else. So getting back to moral compass, ethics, which for me are very problematic words, and as well as humanism and humanist. And somehow I mean, if I think about previous colloquia that we had, and there were engineers somehow asking questions, especially the last one that we had, which was really about ethics, ethics of AI, of artificial intelligence. Somehow listening at these engineers asking question and or contributing to the discussion, I always thought, gee, but these engineers are really the last humanists. They have a really abstract idea of what a human is, and they really care about it, but it's completely abstract, and so they do talk for the human, and they do care about humans or the human in a very abstract way, and they do distinguish very clearly between the machines that they design and the human that should control these machines. And I said, okay, wow, how brave these engineers to be still so humanist in a way. And so somehow I have this problem with these terms.
Yeah.
And at the same time, I found that there are, we found humanism where we didn't expect that. But I'm interested in these things. So for me are problematic, but not that I'm not interested. So where I see the moral compass between, why I see your point of saying that anthropology can play a role of a moral compass. I see it in method. So I'm not an anthropologist, so please, the anthropologists who are here can correct me, but what I learned from anthropology is that it's a bit what I was telling you before. So, and it's in part what Ingold, the quotation that you read by Ingold says. So that somehow methodologically, so it's a methodological issue, first of all. It's not an ethical or it's not related to values in general. It's related to methodological value. So anthropology needs to be able to understand other people, whatever understand can mean, or interpret other people, as you said, mentioning Geertz, in order to describe them in an adequate way.
Yeah.
Okay? So that other people will also understand that. Okay? So the reader of an ethnography will understand the people you write about. So this work of what I would call translation. So, in my opinion, is this need to relate with other people and to be able to understand them and then to translate them, which is, first of all, a methodological need, which somehow introduces an ethics, but it's not an abstract ethics or an ethics that comes from outside. It's inscribed into the discipline, into the need of the discipline. Like if a physicist would need to be able to describe, he needs to be able to describe in an adequate way an atom, and somehow there is an internal ethics of describing that atom and somehow it's the same, but of course with other humans things get a bit more complicated. So I see that there is a moral the role of anthropology as a moral compass, but I see it not as a reference to humanism in general or values, we don't know, but really methodological, epistemological values that, and so we need to be able to describe the others, to translate the others, and if we become able to do that, maybe we can better design for these people and for other people. So
I think first of all the major advantage and one of the few things that I still go to in anthropology, and I think that's a good example for why is it humanistic, is that first of all we annoy people, and we're very good at it because we always ask questions that people don't want to face. And I think for designers, at least at the beginning, it was annoying for the people that work with me, because you always, the thing that I strive towards is that we always make the known alien and the alien known, right? So you always go and ask designers, okay, so why do you do that way? Why are you interested in these people? Why do you design in that way? And they always answer, okay, because that's how we do it, or because that's our tradition, or because that's how the market works. And then you have another 20 questions. Okay, so why? Let's change the market. Let's change how we design. So I think that's very humanistic. But I think in a way, it also can create friction, and it in some cases it can bring practitioners to a place that they don't want to be in, right? Because they have their own comfortable way of doing things, and as I mentioned before, perhaps it was a good choice a few years ago, but now it's becoming more and more difficult because someone with a big bat will come over and do something that you don't believe in. So again, I think the ethics come from that. So you always ask questions, and if you always ask questions, then no one is right. I mean, I don't believe that there's any society or any culture that is more relevant or or more just than the other. I mean, all of us should ask questions about what we do. But I think practitioners find it a bit difficult to handle. At least 10 years ago, that was the case. Yeah.
Thank you. So we get back to anthropology as asking the good questions.
Yeah.
Okay. If there are no other intervention, questions, comments, I think we thank Jonathan. We thank you for coming, and we thank you, Theseus. And thank you very much.
Thank you for coming.